A woman cries out for help, but instead of compassion, she's met with indifference. The very people sworn to protect her dismiss her pain, leaving her to fight not just for her baby's life, but for her own. In the sterile walls of a hospital where emotions run high and every second counts, a battle unfolds, a battle against bias, negligence, and time. This is the story of Monica, a mother whose strength and determination turned a moment of near tragedy into a powerful call for change. With her husband Daniel by her side, she not only survived, but ignited a spark of hope in a broken system. Before we dive deeper into Monica and Daniel's riveting journey of love, resilience, and transformation, comment below and let us know where you're tuning in from today. If this story moves you or inspires you to reflect, don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you never miss another powerful tale. The hospital room shimmered under a cool, sterile light, and the faint hum of machines was a steady reminder of the journey Monica was about to undertake. Seated in a corner, she gripped the armrest of her chair, her heart a whirlwind of excitement and anxiety. It was a moment she had dreamed of for years, and now it was finally here. "How are you feeling, love?" Daniel's deep voice broke the silence, pulling her from her thoughts. Standing by the window, his tall frame radiated calm, though his slightly loosened navy tie betrayed his inner nerves. Today, Daniel wasn't the hospital COO, the man responsible for its smooth operations. Today, he was simply a husband, soon-to-be father, and Monica's steadfast partner through this long-awaited journey. "I'm okay," Monica replied softly, though her hands instinctively rested on her swollen belly as though shielding the life inside. "I just want to meet her already," she added with a small laugh. Daniel chuckled as he walked over to join her, his warm presence a soothing balm. Sitting beside her, he gently held her hand, drawing comforting circles on her palm. "We've got this," he reassured her, his voice steady and sure. For a brief moment, Monica allowed herself to revel in his words, the love and unity that had carried them through so many struggles. The path to this moment had not been easy. Years of fertility treatments, sleepless nights filled with prayers and fleeting hope. Now their baby girl was almost here, her arrival a symbol of their resilience. As a sharp wave of pressure coursed through her abdomen, Monica's smile wavered, her breathing slowing into deliberate measured rhythms. "Just another contraction," she murmured, almost as if convincing herself. Daniel watched her intently, his brow furrowing slightly as he studied her face. "Are you sure you're okay?" he asked, concern threading his voice. Monica nodded, brushing away the unease with a small, determined smile. "I'm fine. It just feels like this pregnancy has lasted forever." Daniel smirked, his attempt to lighten the mood evident. "You've been saying that since month 6. They shared a laugh, a fleeting moment of levity amid the weight of what was to come. Though their bond was unwavering, both knew that labor was an unpredictable journey, one that no amount of preparation could fully control. Earlier that morning, Monica had instinctively known it was time. The sporadic, irregular contractions of the previous weeks had shifted into a steady rhythm, each one announcing itself like a countdown. After a quick call to the hospital, they packed their overnight bag and drove to the maternity wing. The drive felt surreal. Every bump in the road seemed amplified, each passing second a reminder of the life-changing event they were hurtling toward. By the time they arrived, the hospital's maternity wing was quiet, its calm efficiency a contrast to Monica's mounting anticipation. Nurses greeted them with polite smiles, ushering them into a private room. Despite the welcoming atmosphere, Monica couldn't shake a small knot of vulnerability that tightened in her chest. This was her husband's hospital, a place where his leadership ensured order and care. Yet being here as a patient, stripped of control, felt oddly disconcerting. Daniel, pacing near her bedside, exuded the energy of a man trying to contain his nerves. "I thought I'd be calmer than this," he admitted, running a hand through his neatly trimmed beard. "It's because this time, it's personal," Monica replied with a soft smile, resting her hands on her belly as her daughter kicked in response. "We've waited so long for this." Leaning down, Daniel kissed her forehead gently. "You're the strongest woman I know," he said, his voice filled with admiration. A knock at the door interrupted their quiet moment. A nurse entered, her demeanor calm and professional. She appeared to be in her late 40s, her blonde hair neatly pinned back, and her name tag read, Grace. Her cool blue eyes scanned the room before settling on Monica. "Good morning," Grace greeted, her voice polite yet distant, as if she had performed this routine 1,000 times. "I'm your nurse for today. How are we feeling?" Monica shifted slightly, the beginnings of another contraction rolling through her. "I'm okay," she replied, keeping her tone steady despite the growing discomfort. Grace nodded curtly, her focus already on the clipboard in her hand. "First-time mothers often think the pain is worse than it really is," she said dismissively, her tone neutral but unsettling. "Don't worry, we'll get you through this." Daniel, still by Monica's side, watched Grace closely. Something about her tone didn't sit right with him, though he chose not to speak up just yet. Monica, on the other hand, couldn't ignore the uneasy sensation bubbling beneath her calm exterior. Stories she'd heard about black women's pain being dismissed in medical settings crept into her thoughts. But this was Daniel's hospital. Surely, she told herself, that wouldn't happen here. As another contraction hit, stronger than the last, Monica gripped the sheets tightly. A small gasp escaped her lips, drawing Grace's attention. "It's normal," Grace said flatly, glancing at Monica's face without much concern. "Just breathe through it." Monica did as instructed, focusing on her breathing, but a dull ache in her lower back was steadily growing. "I think I need to lie down," she managed, her voice strained. Without much comment, Grace adjusted the bed's position. "It's too early for an epidural," she explained matter-of-factly, "but let us know if anything changes." With that, she left the room, leaving Monica staring at the ceiling, her discomfort mounting. The hours that followed felt like a test of endurance. Daniel stayed by her side, his reassuring words doing little to ease the creeping doubt in Monica's mind. Something felt off, not just with her labor, but with the way Grace had dismissed her concerns. Monica tried to push the thoughts away, convincing herself that she was overreacting. But as the contractions intensified, each one sharper and more demanding than the last, the knot in her chest grew tighter. The hours stretched on, each one bringing a new wave of contractions that left Monica feeling drained and increasingly uneasy. She shifted uncomfortably on the bed, trying to find a position that might offer even a shred of relief, but it was no use. Every movement seemed to intensify the pain. Daniel, ever attentive, remained by her side, his hand holding hers as if trying to anchor her through the storm. But even his calm demeanor was beginning to crack. His glances toward the door, where Nurse Grace had disappeared, were growing more frequent, his jaw tightening each time. "Are you sure you're okay?" Daniel asked again, his voice tinged with concern as he wiped beads of sweat from Monica's brow with a damp cloth. Monica managed a faint nod. "It's worse than I thought it would be," she admitted, her voice trembling. "Much worse." Her words seemed to light a fire in Daniel. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the tiled floor. "I'm getting the nurse," he declared, striding toward the door without waiting for her response. Monica watched him go, a mix of gratitude and apprehension filling her chest. She trusted Daniel to look out for her, but a small part of her worried that his frustration might escalate things further. When Daniel returned, Grace was with him, clipboard in hand, and her expression was as detached as before. "Is everything okay?" Grace asked, her tone devoid of any real concern. "My wife's pain is getting worse," Daniel said, his voice firm. "She needs help. Can you check how far along she is?" Grace sighed, her reluctance obvious. "First-time mothers often overestimate the intensity of their pain," she said, snapping on a pair of gloves with an air of finality. "But fine, let's take a look." Monica winced as Grace performed the examination, her fingers gripping the edge of the bed. When Grace finally stepped back, her expression was unreadable. "You're only about 3 centimeters dilated," Grace announced, stripping off her gloves. "You've got a long way to go. This could take hours. The pain is just part of the process." Monica's heart sank at the words. Hours? How was she supposed to endure this level of pain for that long? A wave of despair washed over her, but she forced herself to take a deep breath. "I don't think I can wait that long," Monica said quietly, her voice almost a whisper. "Something doesn't feel right." Grace raised an eyebrow, her skepticism apparent. "Every labor is different," she said coolly. "You're doing fine, just try to relax." Daniel, sensing Monica's growing distress, stepped in again. "Is there anything you can do to help with the pain?" he asked, his voice strained. Grace shook her head. "It's too early for an epidural," she replied, her tone bordering on impatient. "We don't want to slow down labor with unnecessary interventions. Let's give it more time." More time. The words echoed in Monica's mind like a cruel joke. How much more could she possibly endure? The pain wasn't just bad. It was consuming, a relentless force that left her trembling and drenched in sweat. Daniel's frustration was palpable. He paced the room, running a hand through his hair as he muttered under his breath. "This isn't right," he said finally. "Something's wrong, and no one's listening." Monica wanted to respond, to reassure him, but another contraction tore through her, leaving her breathless. She clung to the bed rails, her vision blurring with tears. "Daniel," she gasped, her voice barely audible. "It feels sharp, like something's tearing." His face went pale at her words. "Stay here," he said, his voice tight with determination. "I'm getting someone else." Before Monica could protest, Daniel was out the door again. She closed her eyes, trying to focus on her breathing, but the pain was unrelenting. A few minutes later, another nurse entered the room. She was younger than Grace, and her expression was more attentive as she approached Monica's bedside. "My name is Sarah," the nurse said gently. "I'm here to check on you." Monica nodded weakly, grateful for the change in demeanor. Sarah quickly assessed the monitors, her brow furrowing as she noted the readings. "I'm going to call for backup," Sarah said, her voice calm but firm. "Just hang in there, okay? We're going to take care of you." For the first time in what felt like hours, Monica felt a flicker of hope. Someone was finally paying attention. But her relief was short-lived. Grace reappeared, her face tight with irritation. "What's going on?" she demanded, her tone sharp. Sarah hesitated, glancing at the monitors again. "Her vitals are dropping," she said, her voice steady but urgent. "We need to act fast." Grace crossed her arms, her expression hardening. "I've been with this patient since she arrived. She's fine. We don't need to overreact just because she's uncomfortable." That was the breaking point for Daniel. He stepped forward, his voice shaking with fury. "Uncomfortable?" he repeated, his tone rising. "My wife is in serious pain, and you've been brushing her off this entire time. If you don't get someone in here right now, I will have your job." Grace opened her mouth to respond, but Sarah was already reaching for the phone. "I'm calling the doctor," Sarah said firmly. "We're not taking any chances." Grace shot Daniel an angry look but stormed out of the room without another word. Monica barely noticed the exchange. The pain was all-consuming now, pulling her under like a wave she couldn't escape. She tried to speak, to tell them something was wrong, but her voice was drowned out by the intensity of it all. Sarah worked quickly, adjusting the monitors and calling for additional support. "We're going to figure this out," she promised, her voice steady. Monica clung to those words, hoping they were true, but as another contraction hit, sharper and more urgent than before, a terrifying thought took root in her mind. "The baby," Monica whispered, her voice cracking. "Something's happening to the baby." The pain was unlike anything Monica had ever felt before, a searing, unrelenting force that left her gasping for air. Her hand flew instinctively to her belly as she fought to stay conscious. Her vision blurred at the edges, and she could feel her strength waning with every passing moment. Daniel was back at her side in an instant, his face pale and etched with worry. "Monica," he said urgently, gripping her trembling hand. "Talk to me. What's going on? It's different." Monica managed to gasp between contractions. So sharp, like something's tearing. Daniel's heart sank at her words, dread pooling in his chest. He glanced toward the door, his frustration and fear boiling over. "This isn't right," he more to himself than anyone else. "I'm getting the doctor." Without waiting for a response, he strode out into the hallway, his footsteps echoing against the polished tiles. Monica could hear his voice in the distance, tight with frustration and urgency, as he demanded immediate help. Moments later, Nurse Sarah returned, her expression calm but focused. She checked the monitors again, her brow furrowing deeper as she studied the readings. "Her blood pressure is dropping," Sarah said quietly, almost to herself. She turned to Daniel, who had re-entered the room behind her. "We need the doctor now." Daniel's fists clenched at his sides. "Where the hell is he?" he snapped, his voice trembling. "She's getting worse." As if in answer to his plea, the door burst open, and Dr. Martin strode into the room. His surgical cap was still in place, and his face bore the marks of someone who had rushed from one emergency to another. He took in the scene with practiced efficiency. Monica's pale complexion, the flickering monitors, and the sheer panic in Daniel's eyes. Without wasting a second, Dr. Martin moved to Monica's side. "Monica, I'm here," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. "We're going to take care of you. Just hold on." Monica tried to nod, but the effort felt monumental. She was barely holding on, her body trembling and drenched in sweat. Dr. Martin quickly examined her, his expression growing graver by the second. "She's in distress," he announced, addressing the team. "The baby is in distress too. We don't have time to wait. Prep the OR for an emergency C-section." Daniel's breath hitched, his fear momentarily robbing him of speech. What's happening to her?" he managed to choke out. Dr. Martin met his gaze briefly but firmly. "The baby needs to come out now. If we don't act quickly, both Monica and the baby could be at serious risk." The words hit Daniel like a sledgehammer. He had always been the one in control, the one who made sure everything in the hospital ran smoothly. But now, with Monica's life hanging in the balance, he felt utterly powerless. As the team moved with swift precision to prepare Monica for surgery, the door opened again, and Nurse Grace reappeared. Her face was tight with frustration, and her tone was sharp as she addressed Dr. Martin. "I don't think this is necessary," Grace said, her arms crossed. "She's only been in labor for a few hours. This is her first baby. Things take time." Dr. Martin turned to her, his expression icy. "We don't have time," he said firmly. "Her vitals are dropping, and the baby is showing signs of distress. This is not up for debate." Grace hesitated, her confidence wavering under Dr. Martin's stern gaze. "But, leave the room," Dr. Martin interrupted, his voice cold and final. "Your negligence has already put this patient's life in jeopardy. If you stay, you'll only make things worse. Get out." Grace's face flushed with embarrassment and anger, but she said nothing as she turned on her heel and stormed out of the room. The tension in the room shifted as the team refocused on Monica. She was quickly moved onto a gurney, the cool air rushing over her as they wheeled her out of the room and down the hallway. The bright overhead lights blurred as they moved, and Monica could faintly hear Daniel's voice beside her, a steady presence amid the chaos. "Stay with me, Monica," Daniel urged, his hand gripping hers tightly. "You're going to be okay. The baby's going to be okay." Monica wanted to respond, to reassure him, but her body felt heavy and unresponsive. The pain was now a distant throb, muted by the haze that had settled over her. As they burst through the doors of the operating room, the sterile smell of antiseptic filled the air. The medical team moved with quiet urgency, preparing Monica for the procedure. Dr. Martin leaned over her, his voice steady and reassuring. "Monica, we're going to deliver your baby now," he said. "Just hang on a little longer. You're in good hands." She nodded weakly, her eyelids fluttering as exhaustion threatened to pull her under. Daniel was forced to stay behind the blue curtain as the surgery began, his heart pounding in his chest. He paced the small space anxiously, running a hand through his hair as his mind raced with worst-case scenarios. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. He had spent years ensuring this hospital ran like a well-oiled machine, but now, with Monica and their baby's lives hanging in the balance, he felt helpless. A nurse approached him, her expression kind but serious. "They're doing everything they can," she said softly. "Dr. Martin is one of the best." Daniel nodded, though the tightness in his throat made it hard to speak. "She told them something was wrong," he said, his voice shaking with anger. "And no one listened. What if it's too late?" The nurse hesitated before responding, her tone quiet but firm. "It's not too late," she said. "Monica is strong and so is your baby. Trust them." Inside the operating room, Monica felt the strange pressure in her abdomen as the procedure progressed. She was barely aware of what was happening, her thoughts scattered and hazy. But then, through the fog, she heard it, a small, fragile cry that pierced the air like a beacon of hope. Tears streamed down Monica's face as the sound registered. The baby was here. She had made it. The first cry of her baby cut through the haze, enveloping Monica and pulling her back to the present. Her heart, which had been pounding with fear, now swelled with overwhelming relief. Tears spilled freely down her cheeks as she tried to catch her breath. The pain, the exhaustion, the helplessness, all of it faded into the background, replaced by a singular powerful thought. My baby is alive. She's here, Dr. Martin announced, his voice steady but tinged with relief. She's breathing, and she looks perfect. Monica's tears turned into soft sobs as she felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. The weight of the ordeal began to lift, though her body remained weak and trembling. She turned her head slightly, searching for Daniel, her lifeline through the chaos. Daniel appeared beside her moments later, his face a mixture of joy and anguish. His eyes glistened with unshed tears as he reached for Monica's hand, pressing it tightly between his own. You did it, he whispered, his voice trembling. She's here, Monica. She's beautiful. Monica smiled weakly, her lips quivering as fresh tears escaped her. Let me see her, she murmured, her voice barely audible. A nurse approached, cradling a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. As the nurse carefully placed the baby in Monica's arms, a sense of completeness settled over her. Monica gazed down at her daughter, her heart swelling with a love so profound it brought fresh tears to her eyes. The baby's tiny face was scrunched, her lips moving slightly as if searching for comfort. Her little fists curled against the blanket, and her eyes fluttered open for a brief moment, revealing dark, curious irises. Hi, sweetheart, Monica whispered, her voice shaky but filled with tenderness. You're here. You're safe. Daniel leaned closer, his eyes fixed on the baby. His hand rested gently on Monica's shoulder, his other hand brushing the soft fuzz of their daughter's hair. She's perfect, he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. For a moment, everything else faded. The sterile lights, the beeping monitors, the chaos that had preceded this miracle. All that mattered was the tiny life cradled in Monica's arms and the love they felt as a family. Dr. Martin approached, removing his gloves and exhaling deeply. She's stable, he said, addressing both Monica and Daniel. The surgery went well, and your baby is healthy. You're both going to be fine. Daniel stood and extended a hand to Dr. Martin, his grip firm but filled with gratitude. Thank you, he said, his voice steady despite the emotions surging within him. You saved them both. I don't have the words to express how grateful I am. Dr. Martin gave a small nod, his expression serious. I'm just glad we caught it in time, but... He hesitated, his tone shifting slightly. What happened earlier should never have gotten to this point. I'll be looking into it personally. Monica's gaze flickered to Daniel, who gave her a reassuring nod. She knew he wouldn't let this slide, not after everything they had been through. As the medical team worked to finalize the post-surgery procedures, Daniel stayed close to Monica and their daughter, his protective instincts in overdrive. When they were finally moved back to the private room, Monica leaned back against the bed, cradling the baby close. She's beautiful, isn't she? Monica said softly, breaking the silence as she looked up at Daniel. She is, Daniel agreed, though his jaw tightened as he sat beside her. His gaze drifted to the door, his thoughts clearly elsewhere. What is it? Monica asked, sensing the tension in him. Daniel hesitated for a moment before speaking. Grace, he said, the name laced with venom. She ignored everything you said. She treated you like you didn't matter. Monica closed her eyes, a wave of exhaustion washing over her. The memory of Grace's dismissiveness was still fresh, her indifference a painful reminder of how close they had come to disaster. I don't want to think about her right now, Monica said quietly, glancing down at her daughter. Not while we have her here with us. Daniel nodded, though the fire in his eyes didn't dim. You're right, he said after a moment, his voice softening. But we have to do something, Monica. We can't let this happen to anyone else. Monica sighed, the weight of his words settling over her. She knew he was right. What had happened to her wasn't just about Grace. It was about a system that allowed bias and negligence to persist, a system that had nearly cost her and her daughter their lives. Later, she said finally, her voice firm despite her fatigue. We'll deal with it later. Right now, let's just focus on her. Daniel leaned over, pressing a gentle kiss to Monica's forehead. You're incredible, he whispered, his voice filled with admiration. Both of you. Monica smiled weakly, her eyelids heavy with exhaustion. We did this together, she murmured. I couldn't have done it without you. Daniel's expression softened as he looked down at their daughter, his heart swelling with pride and relief. I almost lost both of you, he said quietly, the admission barely audible. I can't shake that thought. Monica reached for his hand, squeezing it gently despite her weariness. But you didn't, she said, her voice steady. We're here. We made it. The room fell into a peaceful silence, broken only by the soft breaths of the baby nestled in Monica's arms. For the first time since they had arrived at the hospital, Monica felt a sense of calm, a fragile but precious serenity that she held on to with all her strength. The serenity of the room was short-lived. A soft knock on the door broke the quiet, and Monica's heart skipped a beat. She looked up to see Nurse Grace stepping inside, her expression as cold and professional as ever. "How are we feeling?" Grace asked, her voice detached, as if the past hours of dismissal and chaos hadn't happened. Daniel's jaw clenched as he sat up straighter in his chair, his hand tightening slightly on Monica's. His eyes bore into Grace, the restrained anger radiating off him in waves. "We're fine," Daniel said curtly, his tone icy. "Thanks to Dr. Martin, not you." Grace's lips thinned into a straight line, but she didn't respond. She moved toward the monitors, glancing at Monica's vitals with practiced indifference. Monica could feel the tension building in the room, thick and suffocating. She wanted to say something, to call Grace out for everything she had done or failed to do, but the words felt heavy on her tongue. The ordeal had left her drained, and she wasn't ready to relive it just yet. Daniel, however, had no such hesitation. "You almost cost my wife and daughter their lives," he said, his voice low and steady, but brimming with anger. "Do you even realize that? Do you even care?" Grace straightened, finally turning to face him. Her pale blue eyes flicked to Monica, then back to Daniel. "I was following protocol," she said flatly. "First-time mothers often overestimate their pain." "Don't you dare finish that sentence," Daniel snapped, rising to his feet. His sudden movement startled Monica, but she remained silent, watching the confrontation unfold. Daniel's voice rose, the anger he had kept bottled up finally spilling over. "My wife told you something was wrong, and you ignored her. You dismissed her pain, her concerns, everything she said until it was almost too late. This isn't about protocol. This is about negligence." Grace's expression faltered for the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, the door swung open again. Dr. Martin entered, his commanding presence immediately shifting the atmosphere in the room. His gaze moved between Daniel, Monica, and Grace, quickly assessing the situation. "Is everything all right in here?" Dr. Martin asked, his tone calm but firm. "No," Daniel said, his voice sharp. "It's not. This nurse ignored my wife's cries for help. She nearly killed them both because of her negligence." Dr. Martin's expression darkened as he turned to Grace. "What happened?" he asked, his voice low and authoritative. Grace straightened, her posture defensive. "I was following standard procedure," she said quickly. There were no immediate signs of distress when the patient arrived. Dr. Martin's eyes narrowed. "Except for the patient telling you something was wrong," he countered, his tone cold. "You're supposed to listen to the patient, not just the machines." Grace's mouth snapped shut, and for a moment the room was silent. Dr. Martin stepped closer, his voice steady but filled with unmistakable authority. "Your negligence nearly cost us 2 lives today," he said. "This is unacceptable. You're being placed on immediate leave pending a full investigation." Grace's face paled, her confidence crumbling under Dr. Martin's piercing gaze. "But, no excuses," Dr. Martin interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Leave now before I call security to escort you out." For a moment, Grace stood frozen, her lips parted as if she wanted to argue. But then she closed her mouth, nodded stiffly, and turned on her heel, leaving the room without another word. As soon as the door clicked shut behind her, the tension in the room seemed to lift, though the anger and frustration lingered like a heavy cloud. Dr. Martin turned back to Monica and Daniel, his expression softening. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," he said quietly. "What happened today was unacceptable. You shouldn't have had to fight to be heard." Monica nodded, her throat tightening with emotion. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Thank you for saving us." Dr. Martin gave a small nod of understanding. "We'll be reviewing all of Nurse Grace's actions today," he said. "You have my word that this will be addressed. If you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to let me know." Daniel exhaled slowly, his shoulders relaxing slightly. "We'll be following up on that investigation," he said, his tone more measured now. "This can't be swept under the rug." "It won't be," Dr. Martin assured him. "We'll get to the bottom of this." With that, Dr. Martin excused himself, leaving Monica and Daniel alone once more. For a long moment, neither of them spoke, the weight of everything that had happened still heavy on their shoulders. Monica looked down at her baby, who was now sleeping peacefully in her arms, blissfully unaware of the chaos that had surrounded her birth. "We made it," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "We made it through." Daniel sat down beside her, his expression softening as he looked at their daughter. "Yeah," he said quietly, "we did." But even as they shared a moment of peace, both Monica and Daniel knew that the fight wasn't over. What had happened wasn't just about Grace, it was a symptom of a much larger problem, one that they couldn't ignore. "We can't let this happen again," Daniel said softly, his hand resting gently on Monica's shoulder. "Not to anyone else. Bookmark, go back." Monica nodded, her eyes still on their daughter. "We won't," she said firmly. "We'll make sure of it." The days that followed were a blur of recovery and quiet reflection for Monica. Though her body was healing from the emergency surgery, the emotional scars of the experience lingered. Each time she closed her eyes, fragments of that harrowing day played back in her mind. The searing pain, the feeling of being dismissed, and the overwhelming fear for her baby's life. Yet, when she looked down at her daughter, nestled peacefully in her arms, a sense of purpose steadied her. The baby, whom they decided to name Lily, had brought them both unimaginable joy and a renewed determination to fight for what was right. Monica sat up in her hospital bed, the soft light of the afternoon sun streaming through the window. She cradled Lily close, her tiny fingers curling around Monica's own. Each breath Lily took felt like a reminder that they had survived, that they had been given a second chance. Daniel was by her side as always, though his focus had shifted slightly. Between moments of holding Lily and supporting Monica, he had spent hours speaking with hospital administrators, ensuring that what had happened to Monica would not happen to anyone else. Monica could tell the ordeal had taken its toll on him as well. His usual calm and composed demeanor was frayed at the edges, replaced by a quiet intensity that spoke of sleepless nights and lingering anger. "You've been pacing again," Monica said softly, watching as Daniel stood by the window, his back to her. He turned, a small, sheepish smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Sorry," he said, sitting down beside her. "It's just, I can't stop thinking about everything that happened." Monica reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "I know," she said gently, "but you've done so much already. You've been my rock through all of this." Daniel shook his head, his expression clouding. "I couldn't stop it, Monica," he said, his voice heavy with guilt. "I should have stepped in sooner. I should have done more." "You did everything you could," Monica said firmly, her voice steady despite the emotion rising in her chest. "You got Dr. Martin. You stayed with me. You fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself." Daniel looked at her, his eyes searching hers for reassurance. "I just can't shake the thought of how close we came to losing everything," he admitted. Monica tightened her grip on his hand, her gaze steady. "But we didn't," she said. "We're here. Lily is here, and because of what happened, you're already making sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." Daniel exhaled slowly, nodding as her words sank in. He reached out, gently brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. "You're incredible, you know that?" he said quietly. Monica smiled at the warmth of his words, a balm for her frayed nerves. "We're incredible," she corrected. "We made it through this together." Their quiet moment was interrupted by a knock on the door. Monica's heart skipped a beat as the door opened, revealing Nurse Sarah. Unlike Grace, Sarah's presence brought an immediate sense of calm to the room. "How are you feeling today, Monica?" Sarah asked, her voice warm and genuine as she approached the bed. Monica nodded, her grip tightening slightly on Lily. "Better," she said. "Tired, but better." Sarah smiled, glancing down at Lily with a look of admiration. "She's beautiful," she said softly, "and strong, just like her mom." "Thank you," Monica said, her voice filled with gratitude. Sarah hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "I wanted to apologize for everything that happened," she said, her tone sincere. "You should have been listened to from the start. I'm so sorry you had to go through that. Monica's throat tightened, the emotions she had been holding back threatening to overwhelm her. Thank you, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel, who had been quiet during the exchange, spoke up. What happens now? He asked, his voice steady but firm. Sarah met his gaze, her expression serious. There's an investigation underway, she said. Dr. Martin and the administration are taking this very seriously. Nurse Grace has been placed on leave, and they're reviewing her actions. They've also started looking into broader issues, like how patient concerns are handled, especially for women of color. Monica nodded slowly, her thoughts turning inward. She had always been aware of the systemic biases that existed in healthcare, but experiencing it firsthand had been a stark and painful reminder. It's not just about Grace, Monica said quietly, her eyes fixed on Lily. It's about a system that allows people like her to dismiss patients without consequences. You're right, Sarah said, and that's why changes are being made. It won't erase what happened to you, but it's a start. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he nodded. It's not enough, he said. Not yet, but it's a step in the right direction. After Sarah left, the room fell into a contemplative silence. Monica leaned back against the pillows, holding Lily close as Daniel sat beside her, his hand resting on her knee. We're going to make sure this matters, Daniel said after a long pause. What you went through, what we went through, it's not going to be for nothing. Monica looked at him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. We will, she said firmly. Bookmark. She glanced down at Lily, who stirred slightly in her arms, her tiny face peaceful and serene. At that moment, Monica felt a renewed sense of purpose. 2 days had passed since the emergency surgery, and while Monica was recovering physically, her mind kept circling back to everything that had happened. The hospital room felt quieter now, with only the soft breaths of Lily to fill the space. Monica sat up in bed, gently stroking Lily's tiny hand as she fed her. Despite the peace of the moment, the weight of the experience lingered like an unshakable shadow. Daniel entered the room, a file folder in one hand and a steaming cup of tea in the other. He placed the tea on the bedside table and handed Monica the folder, his expression a mix of determination and exhaustion. They're ready for us, he said, sitting beside her. Monica glanced at the folder, her heart skipping a beat. It contained notes and updates from the hospital's investigation into what had happened during her labor. You've been working non-stop on this, Monica said softly, looking up at Daniel. He shrugged, though the tension in his shoulders betrayed him. This isn't just about us, he replied. It's about making sure no one else has to go through what you did. I couldn't forgive myself if I didn't do everything I could. Monica nodded, her gaze dropping back to Lily. You're right, she said, but it's still hard to relive it all. Daniel placed a hand on hers, his touch warm and reassuring. We'll face it together, he said firmly. Later that afternoon, Monica and Daniel were escorted into a conference room by a hospital administrator. The room was stark and formal, with a long table stretching the length of the space with chairs neatly arranged around it. Dr. Martin was already seated, along with Mr. Thompson, the hospital's CEO, and a representative from Human Resources. Thank you both for coming, Mr. Thompson began, his voice measured but serious. First, let me start by saying how deeply sorry we are for what happened to Monica during her labor. We've conducted a thorough investigation, and we'd like to share our findings with you. Daniel nodded curtly, his expression unreadable, while Monica tightened her grip on his hand. Dr. Martin leaned forward, addressing them directly. The investigation confirmed what we feared. Nurse Grace's actions were negligent. She failed to escalate Monica's condition when it was necessary, dismissed her pain, and made decisions that could have had catastrophic consequences. Monica swallowed hard, her heart racing. She had known all of this, had felt it in every moment of her labor, but hearing it laid out so plainly still brought a fresh wave of emotion crashing over her. Grace has been placed on indefinite suspension, Mr. Thompson continued, his voice grave. She will no longer practice here, and pending the outcome of further legal review, she may face the revocation of her nursing license. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, his focus sharp as he listened. What about the bigger picture? Daniel asked finally, his voice calm but firm. This isn't just about one nurse. This is about a systemic issue, about how patient concerns are handled, especially for women of color. Mr. Thompson nodded slowly, acknowledging the weight of Daniel's words. We're aware that this incident highlights broader challenges, he said. That's why, effective immediately, we're implementing several changes. He gestured to Dr. Martin, who took over. We're introducing mandatory racial bias training for all staff, starting with those in the maternity wing, Dr. Martin explained. We're also updating our protocols for handling patient concerns, particularly in situations involving pain management. These protocols will emphasize listening to the patient and erring on the side of caution. Daniel's expression softened slightly, though the fire in his eyes hadn't dimmed. That's a start, he said, his tone measured. But it can't just be about policies on paper. It needs to lead to real change. Agreed, Mr. Thompson said. We'll be forming a task force to monitor the implementation of these changes and ensure accountability across all departments. We'd like you to be a part of it, Daniel. Your insight and leadership would be invaluable. Daniel glanced at Monica, who gave him a small nod of encouragement. I'll do it, he said after a moment. But this can't just be about optics. It has to mean something. It will, Dr. Martin assured him. The meeting ended with a renewed sense of purpose. As Monica and Daniel left the conference room, the weight on their shoulders felt just a little lighter. In the days that followed, the hospital formally announced the dismissal of Nurse Grace and the new measures being put in place to address bias and improve patient care. The statement was clear and direct, acknowledging the seriousness of what had happened and committing to meaningful change. Monica read the statement in her hospital bed, a whirlwind of emotions swirling within her. Relief that her ordeal had been taken seriously, anger that it had happened at all, and hope that the changes being implemented will prevent others from enduring the same pain. Daniel, meanwhile, threw himself into his new role on the task force. He spent hours meeting with department heads, reviewing training materials, and pushing for accountability at every level. One evening, as Monica fed Lily, she glanced at Daniel, who was seated at the small table in the corner of the room, poring over documents. You've been amazing through all of this, Monica said softly. Daniel looked up, his expression softening as he met her gaze. So have you, he replied. You're the reason we're doing this. Your strength is what's driving all of this change. Bookmark, Monica smiled, though her eyes glistened with unshed tears. We're doing this together, she said. For Lily, for everyone. The morning of Monica's discharge arrived with the warmth of golden sunlight streaming through the hospital window. The gentle hum of the city beyond seemed like a quiet promise of new beginnings. Monica sat on the edge of the bed, her energy still fragile but buoyed by the presence of Lily, cradled securely in her arms. Daniel was bustling around the room, carefully packing their things into a small duffel bag. His movements were purposeful, but Monica could see the weariness etched into his face. It had been an intense few days, but at last they were ready to leave the hospital behind and step into a new chapter of their lives. She's all set, Monica said softly, dressing Lily in a tiny pink onesie. The baby stirred slightly, her little hands stretching out as if testing the world for the first time. Daniel turned to her, his face softening as he approached. She looks perfect, he said, leaning down to press a gentle kiss to Lily's head. Then he looked at Monica, his gaze lingering with a mixture of admiration and gratitude. And so do you. Monica smiled, though a flicker of lingering unease danced behind her eyes. The physical wounds from her ordeal were healing, but the emotional ones were still raw. Every time she thought of what could have happened, her chest tightened with fear and anger. Are you ready to go home? Daniel asked, sensing her thoughts. Monica looked down at Lily, her heart swelling with love and determination. Yes, she said firmly. I'm ready. As they prepared to leave, a nurse Monica hadn't met before entered the room. She was young, with a warm smile that immediately put them at ease. She's absolutely beautiful, the nurse said, her voice filled with genuine warmth as she looked at Lily. Congratulations to both of you. Thank you, Monica replied, her voice soft but steady. The nurse handed Daniel a stack of paperwork to finalize the discharge process. As he worked through the forms, Monica took a moment to reflect on everything they had been through. The fear and frustration of being dismissed, the chaos of the emergency surgery, and the relief of hearing Lily's first cry all felt like a whirlwind that had tested them in ways they never could have anticipated. But it had also strengthened them. Monica looked at Daniel, who was speaking quietly with the nurse, and felt a surge of pride. He had fought for her, for Lily, and for something greater than their own family. As they left the hospital room, walking down the corridor toward the entrance, Monica felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief to be leaving the place where so much pain and fear had occurred. Gratitude for the people who had ultimately saved her and Lily, and determination to ensure that no one else would have to fight so hard just to be heard. The automatic doors slid open with a soft whoosh, and they stepped out into the crisp morning air. Monica breathed deeply, feeling the sunlight warm her face. She glanced at Daniel, who wrapped an arm around her shoulders, his other hand gently supporting Lily in her career. "This is it," Daniel said softly, his voice filled with quiet awe. "Our new beginning." Monica smiled, her heart swelling with a mix of relief and hope. "Yes," she said, "a new chapter." As they walked toward the car, Daniel's voice took on a serious tone. "You know," he began, glancing at Monica, "this doesn't end here. We still have work to do." Monica nodded, knowing exactly what he meant. "I know," she said, "but we've already started making a difference. That's what matters." Once they reached the car, Daniel carefully secured Lily's carrier in the back seat before helping Monica settle into the front. As he started the engine, he turned to her, his expression softening. "We'll keep fighting," he said, "for Lily, for everyone." Monica reached out, placing her hand over his. "We will," she agreed. "But right now, let's just enjoy this moment." Daniel smiled, and for the first time in days, Monica saw a glimmer of peace in his eyes. The drive home was quiet, the tension of the past few days slowly giving way to the quiet joy of starting anew. As they pulled into their driveway, Monica felt a sense of calm settle over her. Inside, the house was warm and inviting, filled with the soft, welcoming light of early morning. Daniel carried Lily inside, her small figure swaddled tightly as she slept. Monica followed, taking in the familiar surroundings that now felt different, imbued with a new sense of purpose. They settled into the living room, Daniel carefully placing Lily in her bassinet before sitting down beside Monica. For a moment, they simply sat together, taking in the sight of their daughter and the quiet stillness of home. "We've come so far," Daniel said, breaking the silence. Monica nodded, her hand resting gently on his. "And we're just getting started," she replied. They both knew the fight wasn't over. Nurse Grace's negligence had been a symptom of a much larger problem, one that they were determined to address. But for now, in this quiet moment, they allowed themselves to simply be a family. As Monica watched Lily sleep, her tiny chest rising and falling with each breath, she felt a profound sense of gratitude for the love that had carried them through, for the strength they had found in each other, and for the chance to fight for a better future, not just for Lily, but for everyone who deserved to be heard. Monica leaned her head against Daniel's shoulder, closing her eyes as a sense of peace washed over her. "We did it," she whispered. Bookmark. Daniel pressed a soft kiss to her forehead. "We did," he said, "and this is just the beginning." The story of Monica, Daniel, and baby Lily is a powerful reminder of the challenges that can arise when compassion and attentiveness are absent in healthcare. It sheds light on the harsh reality of bias, both systemic and individual, and how it can endanger the lives of those most in need of care. Monica's journey wasn't just about her fight to bring her daughter safely into the world. It was a fight to be heard, to be seen, and to be treated with the dignity every patient deserves. The video captures a profound lesson. Listening to those who trust you with their care is not optional. It's essential. Nurse Grace's actions were emblematic of a larger issue, but Monica's resilience and Daniel's determination sparked a change that will ripple through the hospital and beyond. It's a testament to the strength of love, the importance of advocacy, and the need to challenge systems that fail to protect the vulnerable. We're reminded that progress is possible when people speak up and demand accountability. Monica's story underscores the importance of trusting your instincts and never giving up, even in the face of indifference. Her courage, alongside Daniel's steadfast support, turned a harrowing experience into a catalyst for change. Bookmark. Go back. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts with us. Comment 1 if you found the story moving, and 2 if it left a lasting impression on you. We'd also love to hear about your own experiences. Have you ever faced a situation where you had to fight to be heard? Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspirational and thought-provoking stories like this one. Your support helps us continue to share tales that uplift and inspire. Join the conversation below, and let's reflect together on the power of perseverance, love, and change.